Test. Test one. Test.
Test.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, come here.
You all ready?
Oh, there's stairs right there. Yeah.
You all ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to get this over with. Oops.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just gonna stand.
Just want to stand through the, just gonna do this, just like type of square like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it this one?
Yeah, just move there and move back and forth.
Thank you. You wanna take a picture? Oh,
Yeah. Where do you want it?
we should take with the boards maybe.
Okay. Maybe we should
Yeah,
get somebody.
same. Jackson. Someone can take the picture. Please. Oh, I don't.
I made the mistake of catching my eye. Oh, you're doing it on your watch. You have it on your watch. I think once you hit your stride.
What do you mean have a surprise for me?
Yeah.
You know him?
How are you? Well, we just.
It's a lot of.
We have the same.
That's great.
Thank you.
Hey. Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you, yeah.
Before you go, another thing.
Thank you. Hope everyone thinks the same. You might have to go upstairs. Why the whole process took like an hour? Right, thank you.
However, this goes.
I know, right?
It's super proud of you. It's really good. Looking forward to it. And it looks amazing. Like,
Thank
it
you.
really does.
The colors, I'm so glad you changed the theme.
Mhm.
It's really a lot.
Yeah, it's super vibrant. I love it. Screens are very hard. And then you get it just right here and you print it and you're like, what happened? Anyway, good luck.
Thank you. Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what they're gonna say. Hey.
Yeah.
No, you're actually only the second to arrive. This is Marshall. Let me introduce you. Michael, this is Ben Sutherland. Nice to see you. This is Mike. Marshall is. Have a seat. Do you want some coffee over there and Danishes? Okay.
Great.
Let me hold, I'm going to use these up before I think he knows what's going on. Okay, good morning. Our two tardy jurors are parking their cars. So take a moment to get a coffee or a Danish, and then we'll start. The juror number 3 has entered the building. Juror 4 is still walking from the parking garage. Just want to give you an update. All right. So Janet says that she's the important one. She's here. We can start. Todd is strolling on his way here. Good morning, everyone. Too many papers. My name is Eric Jenkins. I'm one of the coordinators of the studio. I want to welcome you, even our faculty, welcome to the University of Maryland School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. These Masters of Architecture thesis presentations. A few things about today. First of all, we're streaming and recording, so remember that. You'll be in the future, someone can find out what you said, Janet. The program will be, each student will get about 50 minutes, and then the chair of the committee will wrap up the presentation or the review. About the microphone, since we're being recorded, I asked jurors to use the microphone, and also because of the acoustics of the space. So let me introduce the jurors today. We have, and I'll start with Michael, right here on the end. Michael Marshall is the design director and founding principal of Marshall Design. I have posted on the walls, and I have these, they're more specific handouts about what they're doing, but he has offices in Washington, D.C. and Dubai, a graduate of Catholic University and Yale. Renata Wren Southard. Wren is an architect and planner, and she's currently the supervisor of the redevelopment strategy planning team for the City of Baltimore's Department of Housing and Community Development, a graduate of our program. Janet Bloomberg, by the way, FAIA, Michael FAIA, Renata AIA, Eric Jenkins RA. Dropped my membership. Janet is the founding member and partner of Cube Architects in Washington, D.C. She is studied at University of Virginia and Columbia University, and studied at a traveling fellowship in India. Is that correct? Okay, and Nepal. So let's start. When Todd gets here, I will not introduce him. Okay, so Letizia, the floor is yours.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I present to you a thesis shaped by lived experiences, systemic patterns, and the power of community. So before I begin, I want to thank my mentors, family, and friends for supporting me throughout this journey, and especially the communities that inspired this thesis. A special shout out to Professor Julie, Professor Jenkins, Samantha Kelly, and obviously the weekend crew. I couldn't have done this without you all. And as Ms. Jordan Carter once said, you don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. Transformation of a space shouldn't mean that you should erase it. We can build better futures within the places people already have established and called home. And this idea became the heart of this thesis. So first, as an undergrad intern at the CASA organization in Langley Park, I saw firsthand the discrimination that immigrant and working class families faced simply because of their legal and economic statuses. I witnessed unhealthy living conditions, unsafe spaces and streets, and overall lack of investment in the community. This led me to ask, how can infrastructure respond to discrimination, unhealthy living conditions, and community disinvestment without triggering displacement? This thesis dives into 3 interconnected issues: inequitable urban regeneration, gentrification and displacement, and community disengagement. I approach these issues through 3 key themes: inclusive development, which ensures equity and accessibility; empowerment, which gives communities agency over their future; and resiliency, which equips neighborhoods to face both everyday challenges and long-term disruptions. So why Langley Park, you might ask? Well, the city is currently facing intense development pressures due to the Purple Line construction, but it's a tight-knit community, largely immigrant and working class, and the area has strong bones with but without connective tissue. It has public transit, schools, parks, grocery stores, but it's all car-centric and not pedestrian-friendly. So this site became the foundation for something different, a way to reimagine infrastructure that centers people, not profit. I grounded my design in the resilient hub typology. These are spaces that serve communities in daily life and during disruptions. They offer safety, services, and a sense of belonging, and they can adapt over time as the needs of the community shift. This thesis was shaped by literature that explored human skill development and addressed how the built environment can support belonging, equity, and everyday life. But it wasn't shaped just by these readings. I also had the opportunity to have real world conversations with people that actually do this throughout their careers. First, we have Majorca Carter. She's an urban revitalization specialist, and she reminded me that transformation doesn't have to mean removal. She spoke about the power of helping people stay and thrive in their own neighborhoods, and her story helped reframe the thesis to not be just a design proposal, but a commitment to dignity, opportunity, and legacy. Christine Baja helped me understand what a resilient hub actually is. It's not just putting solar panels or resilient power energy on a building, but also providing support and spaces that center care, community, and the overall daily life of these members. She talked about the 6 core values, from service programs and emotional support to landscape, power, and maintenance. And she made it clear that a true resilient hub is defined by its people that it serves, not just the technology that it holds. And Thor Nelson helped me sequence the development to help reduce the risk of displacement by investing in housing and social infrastructure before the big catalytic moves. And his insights helped me shape how I organize the timeline for this project, as you can see on the board here. And starting with the needs of the communities first, and then bringing in more of that infrastructure later on. And these conversations grounded the thesis in real world strategies and reminded me that architecture isn't just about form, but it's about trust, memory, and care. From the research, I distilled 5 guiding principles: healthy living, diversity, flexibility, identity, and environmental awareness. And these values guided every site move and design decision. Oops, sorry. The design had 3 key interventions. First, establishing a green link by extending the Northwest Branch Trail into the site and inviting more people from the outside in. Second, strengthening the multimodal connections with better pedestrian and bike access. And third, using contextual scaling to provide a smooth transition from high-density commercial spaces to single-family homes. So the first key theme is inclusive development, and it's the heart of this thesis. It focuses on designing with the community, not just for it, but addressing their needs, fears, and aspirations. And to begin, I drew from community research gathered from UMD's Community Planning Studio, which helped which provided interviews, surveys, and observations within the Langley Park residents. And this research helped me understand what mattered most to them. And from this research, I figured out 6 key priorities. And the first one being that they fear that there will be this displacement as improvements came about. There was a need for better housing conditions, more safe and streets and spaces for children to grow and learn, access to food and urban farming, and of course, football. These elements became the foundation for the design strategies in this thesis. To bring these priorities to life, I created 5 personas, each one shaped by community stories and their real needs. So meet Doña Rosita at the top left. She's a 70-year-old community elder who has been living in Langley Park for more than 50 years and now lives in the senior housing facility on site. Meet Maria and her husband, Jose, and her 2 children, Tomasito and Lucita, as well her mother, Doña Elena, and her brother, Miguel, who is currently studying architecture at UMD. Sophia and Luna. Sophia is a community organizer who loves her dog so much, and she's always beside her. Carlos and Anna are the food entrepreneurs who live on Market Street, as you will see that later on. And Joseph, a teenager who dreams of becoming an architect. And each of these stories shaped the design, and each helped ask, what does it mean to build with the community? So as I mentioned before, the community had the fear that improvements will lead to displacement. So the design phases development carefully, prioritizing the immediate needs and introducing new opportunities over time. This allows them to have space and time to stay, adapt, and thrive without being replaced. So first, it focuses on the immediate needs by moving the residents of Villa at Langley Park apartments to new affordable multifamily housing. And this provided 610 new affordable units, demolished 590, so there was a net gain of 20 units on the first phase. Phase 2 focuses on bringing the civic and natural infrastructure into the site and providing more support and more healthy living elements. For this one, the new construction included 896 units and 9 home ownership opportunities, demolishing 543 units, with a net gain of 353 units and 9 townhomes. Phase 3 brought in Market Street, which provided supporting jobs, culture, and connection, and more diverse housing options. For this phase, there was a new construction of 216 units and 9 more home ownership opportunities, demolished 192, with a net gain of 24 units and 9 home ownership opportunities. Finally, for phase 4, pedestrian stamps were added into the design to provide this connection to the transit hub and connecting other different modes of transportation and providing also more housing. So in total, the demolished units were 1,325, and the new construction was 1,812 with 18 townhomes, and the net gain is 487 units with 18 townhomes. The second element was that families wanted to see better housing conditions and have more diverse options. So therefore, the design offers housing such as affordable rentals, townhomes for ownership, senior living, and some market rate units. And choice and flexibility allowed the community to grow without having to leave. Then we have safety and comfort, which were also major concerns. So public spaces and streets are redesigned for walkability and safety with active edges, minimized alleys, and buffered bike lanes. This allows for the multi-generational family seen in the center to feel safe walking to places, and for Joseph on the far right to bike safely to the library. These small moves help build everyday trust and safety within the community. The community also expressed their wants for more places for children to learn, play, and be cared for. Design includes a daycare center, which is connected with the senior living facility. And every day, Rosita volunteers at the daycare center. As you can see, she's being hugged by the children here. And the kids love her so much. Then the community also wanted food security and spaces for growing food. So there's an agricultural center on site with urban farms also at the block level and safe routes to the nearest grocery stores. And this allows for Carlos and Anna to purchase fresh vegetables and herbs for their restaurant just steps away from their home. And finally, the community wanted more recreation, especially soccer. So the site includes a full-size adult field that splits into 3 youth games, plus futsal, basketball, and volleyball courts. And Sophia and Luna love to run inside the park before they head off to some advocacy work. So for empowerment, it means creating spaces where people feel in control of their environment, their choices, and their growth. And at the heart of this site is a resilient hub anchored by CASA, which is located inside a historic building, seen on the center. The hub also includes a library and service building with health clinic, workshop, supportive spaces, and temporary housing. And at the library, you can see Joseph and Miguel in the makerspace where they have their mentorship and design guidance meetings. And nearby, Market Street offers live work units for entrepreneurs like Carlos and Anna, and a median that supports pop-up vendors and a weekend pedestrian transformation for a farmer's market. Sophia also runs a market stand for CASA and supports her neighbors with resources here as well. And overall empowerment focuses on supporting small businesses, pathways for home ownership, providing supportive programs and flexible spaces for work, health, and culture. It's infrastructure that invests in the people. Resiliency isn't just about surviving a crisis, but being supported through it physically, emotionally, and socially. So the first thing was that the agricultural center and the park have a closed loop system where the rain gardens filter water and is reused to irrigate the plants in the agricultural center. Then we have site-wide green infrastructure, which helps reduce flooding, combat the heat island effect, and generate renewable energy on site. So the Resilient Hub also provides support during disruptions. So when Maria and Jose both lost their jobs during an economic downturn, the Resilient Hub activated. The family received temporary shelter, counseling, and resources to help them navigate through this issue. And they were not alone, and the community held them until they were back on their feet. So this is what a resilient community looks like. Overall, this design isn't just hypothetical. It's rooted in real people and their real needs. And it ends where it begins, with the community. Everyone comes together at Carlos and Anna's restaurant. And as you can see here, Rosita and Doña Elena are catching up on chisme. Sofia and Luna pause to eat some pupusas. And Joseph and Miguel chat about architecture while Maria and Jose celebrate a soccer win with their kids. So this is the thesis in motion, a community sustained, not replaced. This thesis proposes more than buildings. It imagines infrastructure that supports healing, resilience, and continuity. It argues that investment doesn't have to come at the cost of removal, and it offers a new lens, one where neighborhoods like Langley Park aren't seen as starting over, but as places with deep roots worth nurturing. And I'll leave you with another quote from Majority Carter, which states, "We have the power to shape the places we live in, and in doing so, they shape us." This thesis is about exactly that, shaping places not just with buildings, but with care and with trust, and of course, with love, so that neighborhoods like Langley Park are not erased, but nourished. And thank you.
So Leticia, first of all, I do want to interrupt before we start comments. Todd Ray is here. Todd Ray, FAIA, is a principal and head of design at Page Architects in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. You're everywhere. You're everywhere, right? Before we go into comments, could you walk us through the boards? Can you point out to like where these perspectives are taken, where the sections are taken? Just to walk us through from left to right, essentially, and talk about your sketches as well.
So these are just iterations of how this design evolved. But the boards are organized from the 6 main categories, and then inclusive development and empowerment. So we have the phasing here, and then Safe Streets is on Market Street. Yes. So it's right here, looking that way, so where the 9 is. Spaces for Children is the front of the senior living facility and the daycare. So here where 4 is. And food access is in front of the agriculture center and the greenhouse, so here. And outdoor recreation space is over here looking into the park and the soccer field. And then we have the empowering small business, how Carlos and Anna, their business evolved throughout their experience on this design. The progression of housing, so how one can start off by living in an affordable multi-housing and move up as you go, eventually owning your own home, and then when the time comes, you can live in an affordable senior living facility. And then the two sections are the strategies. And then these two section perspectives are Market Street, so cutting across here where the 9 is, to show like that experience inside those buildings. So you have a business at the ground level, and then you live at top, and then you have that median that's activated with tents, pop-up tents. And then the Resilient Hub is cutting through the library and the service building. And then the one in the background is Casa, which is located in a historic building. And then, yeah, it's right here. So the only building that's not in white. Yeah, and these are just the people and their experience throughout the site. Oh, the model. So this is just the existing conditions model. As you can see, I don't have a drawing of the existing conditions because I decided to model out to be able to get that sense of what the community and the overall topography is on site. And then this one over here is of Market Street and the Resilient Hub. So you could probably pass it around. So north is the other way.
I think this is really thought out well, and the process from A to Z is very, very clear and what
Thank
you were
you.
after. And being a native Washingtonian, I've seen the evolution of Langley Park.
Yeah.
Everything from probably in the 60s and 70s, white flight from DC, moving out to the suburbs, and then different groups of people inhabiting those same places. So now that it's a Latino community.
Yeah.
But my question with all of the urban design and planning that you have, why didn't you go for more density? I mean, there's a housing shortage, and the layouts that you've come up with, I think, can take 6, 7-story buildings instead of 3, for instance, there, which means you can still have the retail at the base like you have it. And then especially with the mode of construction that's prevalent now, that's somewhat economic, of concrete podium, as we call it, for the retail and parking maybe, and then wood frame on top of that, which allows you to go maybe 5 stories.
Yeah, so the affordable multifamily housing block is 6-story tall buildings. The reason why there's different scales of housing is that contextual scaling, but also you have the different incomes, so people could rent according to their economic
Well,
status too.
once a developer is interested in this, they're going to probably want to maximize the density due to the fact that they would have put in all the infrastructure, all of the physical structure, for the ground floor and what's in the ground. And so it's economic to then just keep going.
Right.
And so I think your project with the planning is very successful, but I think a sense of enclosure, if you will, or a sense of with taller buildings could have been just fine with the layout that you've done.
Okay.
So that's otherwise this looks great.
Thank you.
I like the way you've illustrated it. It's not, that you're doing sort of super real. It still keeps it somewhat conceptual.
Yeah.
And I think also then friendly to people who you might present this to in a public meeting, because then they can feel like they can imagine more into it rather than this is it.
Yeah.
When you do some things sometimes that are super real and all figured out.
Right.
So a bit of a sort of a cartoon illustration, I think,
Yeah.
is very helpful.
Thank you.
Great work.
Thank you.
Yeah, first, I would like to say the illustrations, I also gravitated right to the illustrations. I thought the story you told was really beautiful. I
Mhm.
love the fact that you started with community. All of my work at the City of Baltimore starts with community.
Yeah.
And so having them at the core is really important. And that leads me to my first question, which is how did arts or culture or existing architectural language or typologies find their way into your project? How did they inform the decisions that you made?
So what was currently on site were all apartments. I didn't tear anything that was like civic infrastructure. It was, and then Casa was like the staple and the anchor of everything. So that stayed, especially since it's a historical building. But through my research, I saw that there were a lot of individuals that had like small businesses inside their apartment units. So that inspired Market Street and the pop-up vendor median. And then also like their interviews and surveys and stuff, that's when they're mentioning like the other spaces that they would like to see. And so that's how I included their vision.
Yeah, I love to hear that because that really talks about the typology and the decisions that you made with the kind of small scale retail that's got the housing above it.
Mhm.
It harkens back to a lot of the main street conditions that we have in Baltimore City and, market corridors in Washington DC and things like that. So I love to see that kind of baked in. There's a couple of really beautiful models I think that could be inspiring to you as you go on with your career. The beautiful thing about this thesis is like, it's not the end of something. It's really
Right.
the beginning. It's you stepping off into your career and, hopefully a lot of years of doing this kind of work.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of models. There's one in South America where it's like a shell. I think it's like an 80% finished build, and then they let the community kind of finish it themselves. So it takes on this really diverse, really intimate character because it's not finished by a developer. It's
Right.
rather finished by the people who live there who are going to use it and occupy it. So that might be something that you might want to look at.
Okay.
The other thing that this reminded me of, there's the HUD has a program called Choice Neighborhoods. It's a federal grant program where they do exactly what you've done here, which is demolish outdated mid-century public housing typologies that never really functioned the way that communities function.
Yeah.
They had sort of built-in surveillance, urban design techniques and things like that that never really supported community engagement and the kind of comfort like neighborhood fabric that you see in older parts of cities. But that might be something, there's a lot of that happening right now regionally. That might be something that you're interested in looking at as you, kind of step out into your career.
Yeah.
One thing I was gonna say that I saw in the renderings that I was kind of missing in the presentation, I was really happy to see your diagrams. There's a couple of kind of like big urban design moves that I was questioning whether you studied, and as I was flipping through your renderings or your studies, your hand sketches and things like that, I saw them. And number one is this idea that you've got kind of two main streets where it says 10 and like just below 7,
Yeah.
where it makes me from an urban design perspective want to like wrap my arms around a green space where that historic building kind of like sits at one end. Could the streets have kind of gone through and framed it a little bit better? I see that you studied a lot of different layouts.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear how you landed on this as kind of like, I'm assuming that the historic building is the kind of anchor to that green space. And can you talk a little bit more about how you came to that as kind of the center of your project?
So the center of the project is the resilient hub. So it's Casa, the service building, and the library. And then the center space are outdoor meeting spaces, since they do have like these large gatherings as a community. So providing those spaces for them, and then a paved area so they like an amphitheater type space, so have a larger like space.
Okay, that's great. I'm glad to hear that you thought a lot about how that was going to be used. And then one final comment before I pass the mic off. I would have loved to see, it seems like you thought very much about the urban design, and the Resiliency Hub program in the historic building is wonderful. If you had another, 6 months to work on this, I would have loved to see that explored more architecturally about,
Yeah.
because that's a real adaptive reuse of a historic building. Could you have modified the building in some way that really spoke to the program, the new program that was going in there, that really is about sustainability and kind of forward thinking, and not just about the solar panels, but also all of the activity that happens there.
Yeah.
But great work, and I will pass the mic.
Hi. So as an architect who goes to a lot of juries, is on a lot of juries, I'm extremely refreshed to see your focus on people, right? And these stories of these families, and everything is all about people. A lot of times we see these buildings that in the end, there's not even one person in a drawing. Like, did you draw one person? We do design for people. So I
Yeah.
want to really, really praise you on the overall thinking and the sort of the fact that you relate to this community. This is something that really means something. I was at UVA on juries a week ago, and we were talking about how you have to really pick something that you have passion about when you do a piece of architecture or urban planning or whatever you're doing, and make it personal, because then you're going to do a better job. And that's what you did.
Yeah.
And I love, again, the stories of these families. I can see that you know them, and you know the people that you worked with from the city, all that stuff. Phenomenal. I know Langley Park. I think that it's a terrific idea to improve it. So I'm also an architect, and you mentioned sort of beyond form. Well, I don't need to think about form, so my concern here is form and scale. And to be honest, just the built fabric here. So for a next step, I would say this is a terrific and exhaustive work, and you've done a ton of work, and it shows. So again, I don't want you to take this as a negative. It's more of a next step, which is that I would really look at the architecture. I would look at the building. They look very, very unappealing. I don't want to go there. I want to go to the old buildings. You were saying, I wonder why you didn't renovate some buildings, maybe keep some of the older ones, to be honest, mixed in, because when everything is new, you go to these communities, a lot of times it's like really missing something. So I'm not saying that, it's right or wrong, but I would have loved to see more evaluation of why you changed all the buildings.
Yeah, so like as I mentioned before, it's all really in bad conditions, so that's why.
We renovate all the time. We get buildings that are in terrible condition. That's what we do. We do adaptive reuse, typically in the city. So, what worries me is it's a little bit of a American solution. We'll just run it all down and do it, and that's a concern. I mean, there's resources. You're talking about resiliency, sustainability. That's not sustainable at all. So I would have just loved to be more convinced, and I'm not yet when I look at the old plan, and I know Langley Park for the new. I'm not totally sure. I'm convinced you've made it enough better to do all the work you're doing. In addition, the scale to me is off. I think back to what Michael was saying, if it's going to be that wide, you need taller buildings, in my opinion. It's just off on scale, and you can see that in these. So the other option is make more, I'd like to see in your plan more of a breathing of, a wide space, wide street, medium street, small street, alleys. So the other thing to think about is studying just the fabric of DC and some of that moderation, mediate, what do you call it, like frequency or whatever the word is, of different widths and different scales that you get into. Urban grain, thank you, that's a great word, yes. Hierarchy, perfect. So that's something. The other thing is, like if you go to Italy or, Europe, study European cities, towns, actually villages, because you'll just come upon a little, piazza or a little courtyard or a little, so like 5 houses will share one little space, and then a bigger one there, and then there's a really big, plaza, or so there's all those different scales happening, which I'm not seeing in your plan enough. And so that's the next step, is to really not study as much. I did say DC, but go beyond the States, go back to Europe, look at how old cities naturally kind of, developed in more of a natural way, and could you incorporate some of that into this? And lastly, when I look at these, I'm not seeing that indoor-outdoor architectural connection. Everything comes right to the ground. You have front, that looks very much like a New York sort of Park Slope, right, street where you have steps and everyone's in their houses and when they come out, they're on the street. I'd love to see a much more creative indoor, outdoor set of spaces in all of these, and even in the resiliency hub, all of that
Mm-hmm.
opening so that the landscape and the buildings interact more.
Okay.
And also landscape can be very architectural. I don't see benches, I don't see layers, I don't
Mhm.
see levels, I don't see steps. So look much more closely at well-designed landscapes
Yeah.
and how that becomes very architectural. And then that can go into the building aspects can come out, and suddenly you have much more. And when we're talking about safe streets and safe places,
Mhm.
I'm seeing windows, but I don't see porches. I don't see people sitting outside,
Mhm.
watching children. So, look at other architectural trends that contribute to what you were doing.
Yeah.
But it's glass. Oh, that's what you're saying. Yeah. It's solid, exactly.
Mm.
And the resiliency space too, that you say that they're working together at the back. Why aren't they, maybe flip it so that the stacks are to the back and the active spaces are to the, so
Okay.
you really, yeah, but again, it's just steps. Like I'd love to see a porch.
Okay.
So you can be creative about, well, that's true too. But I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of get it because there's so much that she took on. It was, we want unit plans.
Sorry, she's planned the townhouse typology, but what about the multifamily?
Yeah.
I have a feeling that it's not deep enough to have a corridor down the middle and apartments on either side. And so that would also, understanding the typology of those components
Mm.
would probably help to adjust the scale and the planning also. So next
Yeah.
step.
Yep.
So I'll let Todd talk now. It's been a while, but great job overall.
Thank you.
Really, really good work. And, again, so much you've introduced that the conversation is very wide ranging, and that's a positive. That's a really,
Right.
really good thing.
Oh my. So thank you. As we all start, I'd echo all the praise, and then I'm going to dive right in if that's
All right, that's fine.
yeah. The wonderful thing, sort of the beautiful thing about planning is that it takes a patient individual that has a long vision. Gotta hold it really close. Okay. So it takes a patient person because it's a very long undertaking and there's a lot of communication and a lot of engagement. You've begun to understand that and sort of model that. What's striking to me is that by the time this would get done, Joseph would be way out of school, have his own job, be 40 years old. And then so yeah, he would be retired. And then so understanding the longevity of the vision
Yeah.
and then how you need to begin to sort of conceptualize conditions that are outside of your realm. So one of the first things that I always look at when I see that is I look at the current zoning map, and then I look at some sort of a comprehensive vision that's maybe 20 years out based upon the zoning people, because you're going to be developing those.
Mhm.
And then so when I was seeing your diagrams, the first thing I was wondering is, what's the current zoning? What's our current density? Where are we going to with that density? And it's a tiny little map up there that isn't presented here. And then so it made me wonder where your foundations were and what kind of a structure you were going to take to make this kind of change. And that's the first kind of fundamental diagram to get an understanding when you're having a vision of, the 25 years that you're presenting to us.
Yeah.
And then echoing some things that were said earlier is that you have these isometric diagrams that are kind of small based upon where we're sitting right now. I'm really convinced by the sketches that you did of this exploration and understanding of layering, hierarchy of streets, and where you carried the idea from and to,
Mhm.
and sort of the graining and the understanding that's there.
Yeah.
And so I don't see that here yet. And I
Mhm.
know that it occurred because you showed it to us now. And then so just as when you're presenting, sometimes you need to walk others through all the thoughts or many of the critical thoughts and decision making that you made.
Yeah.
And because that, in a setting like this, as a planner, you're going to be doing this 2 days a week. You're going to be presenting large-scale images to communities to convince them of ideas.
Right.
Sometimes you have to take them on small steps. And then this kind of documentation helps get us there. The other thing, so I'm currently working on 2 repositionings of 50-acre parcels. one's 50, one's 67. And so I'm working with a lot of economists, and I'm working with some planners, working with city planners, and then also other planners. And one of the things that's really striking to me is that these models are not working anymore. I didn't know that either. And then so I was looking at these typologies, and you say progression of housing. And so I was taking it apart because I saw progression as this evolution. And so when I started on this side, I thought when I got over here, I was going to have something completely different. Instead, what I'm seeing is striations of typology. And then so I think the title is a little bit misleading,
Okay.
but I think the thinking is critical, because the notion of a progression of housing is reimagining what a typology should be in a post-COVID, economic-driven world. Because this is not really the way that we should be striating housing. You have multifamily, but then you have multi-generational. You don't striate the children from the elderly. And then you also don't striate it based upon economy. So the notion of affordable housing, mixed income, and market rate, those are all blended. And so you could take these and you could start them out at a matrix on the top and then on the bottom, and then you run that matrix down to the bottom right. That model is your progression of housing. And so looking at the way then that then applies to an urban condition, the term that's been poised to me, it's been tossed at me and I didn't know how to catch it, was, oh yeah, we don't have mixed use any longer. What? Economic strategist says it doesn't work. All this research that we've done development models, affordable housing, you can only build, what was it? Had a conversation with a developer recently and he says, okay, multifamily housing at the platform scale, or the podium model, which is what you're using here, it pencils out in 2 cities in the United States right now because of the economic. And so we're not doing those kinds of models any longer. We're looking at alternate models, and it's based upon spatial densities that we can get on particular sites with PUDs. And so that's what's going to happen here at Langley. And then so when you start to overlay, which I think is sort of a planner's responsibility, is to understand the economic conditions that are driving an architectural model that is viable within a capitalist society, which we all exist within. And then so looking at this cross section, I tried to sort of imagine in here mix of uses and how that blends. Because in a post-COVID condition, dwelling is completely different, and working is completely different, and living is completely different. And then so these models, I appreciate now, and part of school is learning that typology. Now my challenge to you as you take it further, mix them up. And so I would carry that over into also the service building, the amphitheater, and the library. Library is an obsolete typology 25, 30, 40 years ago. David Ajay, when he did the idea store? Is that what he called it? I don't know if I should quote Ajay in the setting, but anyway. Yeah, okay, because I'll stir a pot. I'll stir a pot. It's an idea store. And so basically you go there to consume and to generate. And it's then kind of a making space of research and idea. So let's say that you can't use the word typology or the typological word library any longer, and you start to reconceptualize what that is. That brings into the condition of the future urban fabric that we're going to have. The wonderful thing is that people get together. And so then the question is what do they do and where do they do it? And that's sort of your whole central thing there. I would say, how can we add 10 layers of vibrancy on that? And then how can we not, and this is sort of a fundamental condition about being in education, is we need to striate to understand. So we take the typologies and we do that, and then you've done the same thing with sustainability. What is a sustainability model? The other thing about the education, or being in an environment of education, is that you're to project and sort of imagine things that are just maybe unachievable. But boy, if we don't throw it out there, we're not going to get there. And then so in the Resilient Hub and in the sustainability strategies, I see that you've isolated, very simple in the same mindset as typologies. It's typologies of sustainability, typologies of striation of a street, How do you make those even more rich? I.e., when cars drive on a road, they vibrate the road. Can we capture that vibration and turn that into an energy generation device? Can we actually take all of these buildings, pipe them into the sanitary sewer system, and then that becomes our entire heat recovery system? So that basically this core area here is a central plant that runs off of the heat generation and heat sink capability that we have in our natural sanitary systems. So it's like, pow, right? Let's go a little bit.
Yeah.
So all of these technologies exist and all of them are being done right now.
Yeah.
So I would invite you to sort of explore some more of those as you begin to imagine this further.
So this is Adam Bresnik. Adam Bresnik is our key professor, and he's also an architect, graduate of our program, practices in Madrid mostly.
Kind of a hard act to follow. Thank you. I would reiterate what most of my colleagues have said. It's a very persuasive project. Although Todd was very persuasive as well, so kind of makes me rethink what I was thinking. But I would reiterate, like, I would like more information about the historic structure on site, about what is being removed. And I think your process is so much richer than what we're seeing on the boards. And I feel like the boards are almost the final developer presentation and not the architectural presentation. So what I would like would be like the before and after plan, you know, the analysis, all that information that got you here, which I like where you are. And I think we all do. But I think I would want to see more of the process, even though you told it in a very persuasive and elegant way. You actually remind me, there was a woman I went to high school with, and she went to Amherst College, which everybody's, it was a earthy, crunchy sort of place. And then she went to architecture school, and then she became a developer, because she said the only way she could have a real impact on the built environment was by being the developer. And so that, I was thinking of her when I was listening to your presentation and then the comments of everybody else, because the way that you listen to the community, I think that's something that the first person who spoke pointed out, really feels like a good place to start as a real world project, which is what I think you want this to be. And then I love the layering that everybody else has added on top of that, about maybe some preservation, maybe maintaining some of those mid-century modern buildings because they have embedded carbon and all of that. So I think if you take into account all the comments by the jurors and enrich what you already have done, you're rocking. So thank you.
I think part of what Todd's getting at too is what I was thinking is that if you're going to do this big move of basically, you know, taking everything down and it needs to be forward thinking and something that shows us that it's better than what was there. And not just the architecture that, okay, these were old and falling down and this is new. That's not enough. So I think what Todd's getting at, that creativity of pushing the envelope and thinking into the future, as he's saying, it's going to take forever to build this thing. So we'll be so far gone, you know, the whole resilient systems, all those things will change. So when it's a big move that you're doing, it's expensive. It affects the, you know, it affects our world. It affects our carbon. It affects everything and the people and how's it going to be done. I would even love to know how you're not displacing all the people by, you know, how are you taking care of the people while you do this? That phasing diagram would have been interesting. So thinking through, if you're going to take, it's not just like, okay, I'm going to mow it down on a piece of paper. These are real lives, as you saw, and real buildings and our real world you are strongly affecting. So you need to push it, as Todd's saying, to this other thinking through the future and not where we are right now.
Right.
So.
One more?
I was just gonna pick up on that thread. The one piece that I got out of listening to everybody on the panel is that there's, I think, a disconnect. Sometimes I look at the past and say, here, I see what's wrong with it. And I think that there's, if you had another semester to put on that thinking hat and take yourself 50 years in the future, and as like a seasoned, professional at the end of your career, what would you think about this? What would you change? How is it different than what we're doing now? How is it different than people who were thinking that they were building the future 50 years ago? So, but great job and all.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that, again, knowing the area, the existing buildings there aren't helpful. So I think starting from scratch is the way to go, which is what you've done. So good work.
Thank you.
Julie and Madeline. Julie Gabrielli is the chair. Madeline is, Miss Simon is the committee member. And now you have the last comment.
Okay, well, thank you to Leticia for sponsoring such a rich conversation and presenting one of the bigger visions that we've seen around here for a while. And I just want to mention that one of the hallmarks of a successful thesis is to raise more questions than can be answered in a single project like this. I always think of thesis as a stake in the ground for your career. It doesn't have to be, we say that on the first day for a seminar, but in your case, boy, you did that. And I just want to clarify that Leticia is a single degree master's architecture student. Not yet a planner, not yet a developer, but who knows? You got a long life ahead of you. I just finished a book called Moral Ambition, which I highly recommend to everybody here, including you. And basically the main question, the central question there is, where can I apply my skills, talents, and passion where it will do the most good? And I think this project is a great signpost for you. Inspired by personal experience with this community in a real place, and the passion that you bring to it to make the world a better place. And this project is backed by thorough research, as you saw, not just book learning and the literature review, which you did do, studying the demographics, studying the history of this place, and then also the community engagement material from our colleagues at Planning, which I still don't remember how you got that, but that was so cool. And reaching out to other colleagues in this school, like the Purple Line Corridor Coalition and others. And that's also unusual for an architecture student, not a dual degree candidate. So congratulations on that. And I just want to also note your ability to synthesize so much information that you gathered and to combine that with personal experience, with a clear vision, the theory, the architectural theory, the urban design theory, community input, and also weekly feedback from us and from your peers. And just kind of always listening, always responding to whatever inputs you're getting. I really enjoyed working with you for that. So as we know, it's a very ambitious premise here. There are the phasing diagrams there that you mentioned. Thoroughly thought through. Like, I don't know about, like actually how you would relocate people physically, but, the numbers of units and that. But I also just want to call attention to Leticia's qualities, like her persistence, her dedicated work ethic, her good humor, and that she worked through some serious personal challenges this semester to get to where you are. And I know it wasn't just this semester, like your whole sort of journey through undergrad and grad school is remarkable. And I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that's it. Like, I probably would be repeating myself if I kept going, so good
Thank
job.
you.
Well, I assume she did see value, I'm just guessing. But she didn't say that.
Yeah.
She said that. Yeah, what's the stuff? Yeah. You know, Wayfair, everybody. Story. And the garden apartment, but not, you know, one side of their property, I don't know. I think that. What? Yes. Yeah, I mean, look at this. All of that should be doubled in width and then doubled in height. Yeah, housing. You know, and I'm not sure. Great. Sure.
Lovely.
This one up.
Was it what? Oh, click it? Okay.
We can
Nice.
use these and all that.
Sounds good. Okay.
Okay. So why don't we get started? We're going to talk to Hannah Gross. Hannah is working in Pound, Virginia. Her committee chair was Joseph Williams behind you, and second committee member, Adam Ainsley. And the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for being here. My name is Hannah, and this project is called The Missing Teeth, The Holes in Our Communities. This is an urban design project that focuses on additive design to a main street condition that with more detailed development into 3 specific building sites. It looks to provide an overall vision for the site on about a 20-year timescale. In 2021, when I was a junior Bachelor of Architecture student, I visited Charleston, West Virginia on a trip where I was doing home repair. After the workday, I would sometimes enjoy warm summer evenings exploring the small capital city with its layers of historic building styles and civic buildings. However, I quickly noticed a discrepancy between the west and the east sides of the river. While the east side had concerted redevelopment effort, the west side felt underpopulated and relatively empty. One morning, a group of us went for a coffee and where we were staying on the west side. Even though it was only a couple of blocks, I kept noticing empty storefronts. When we left for the workday, I would notice lots blocked off with chain link fence where a footprint where there used to be a building. And I wondered what happened to leave them empty. The dichotomy of the city left an impression on me. We were there to do home repair work, but what about city repair work? In starting the research for a thesis, I found the architectural term to describe this as missing teeth, which I found referenced in literature as far back in 1997 with the University of Pennsylvania defining them as a vacant lot or a group of adjacent lots within a block that creates a gap between houses. The term also appears on a podcast by social critic and author James Howard Kunstler in 2008, where the definition is expanded to include parking lots and vacant lots as other typologies. From my own experience and research including economics, criminology, psychology, I proposed the missing teeth theory, that the presence of missing teeth in an urban fabric are not only an indicator of downtown urban decline, but actively contribute to it. They can make pedestrians feel unsafe or imply to businesses and investors that the area is not economically viable, creating a positive feedback loop of disinvestment in a downtown. This thesis proposes to expand the definition of missing teeth to further include empty storefronts and buildings that are much shorter than their surrounding context because they break the enclosure of the street. The application of the missing teeth theory proposes that the opposite is also true, that filling in the missing teeth can start to create a positive feedback loop, yes, of reinvestment that can start to revitalize downtown. Having visited Central and Southern Appalachia for many years, I'm somewhat familiar with both the economic challenges of the region and with the propensity of the culture to create strong interdependent communities. Therefore, it felt like a great place to test the theory. So the guiding question for the design became, how can selective infill of the missing teeth of a small town urban form strengthen communities experiencing depopulation, minimal resources, and environmental stressors? Highlighting the regionally specific challenges of Appalachia, depopulation and resource extraction driven by the exit of the coal industry, and environmental hazards. One specific environmental hazard that started to play a major role in the project was an increase in major floods. My second year as a volunteer, when I was 16, a 1 in 1,000 flood event almost destroyed the small town of Raynell, West Virginia. I heard personal stories passed around by other volunteers about either experiencing it personally or being a part of the Rebuilding Raynell effort with Appalachia Service Project. This phenomena has only gotten more common with climate change, one example being this past fall with Hurricane Helene's destruction of Asheville, North Carolina. It's important to note that buildings that come down due to flooding often cannot be replaced due to floodplain restrictions, and they become missing teeth. Because of this, the missing teeth theory also prefers that buildings in good shape are not removed from the urban fabric because that's removing a resource from an under-resourced area. Two major themes from the testing of the thesis to keep in mind. Missing teeth can be filled with buildings or program, as it's possible to define a street edge with both. These options can also be referred to as habitable space, defined by building code as a space for living, sleeping, eating, or cooking, or non-habitable space. In this project, habitable space refers to an enclosed building meant for constant occupancy versus non-habitable space being exterior or partially closed space meant for temporary occupancy. The second major takeaway from studying the application of the missing teeth theory is that it needs to be applied with a highly site-specific lens. With the overall theory being infilling missing teeth improves the urban experience can be applied to many different situations, the actual design must be able to respond directly to the site-specific challenges of the individual site, no more and no less, for a successful revitalization. For this reason, I hope to now bring you a good understanding of the context surrounding the chosen site. Let me introduce you to the town of Pound, Virginia. Pound has a population of 844 in 2023, down from hovering around about 1,000 residents for most of its life since its founding in 1950. Through this process, it was important to me to talk to people who live in the town, and from this I learned that while Pound itself was not a coal town, it was where people in neighboring coal towns came to shop. It currently struggles with retaining its young adult population, and much of its existing building stock is threatened by either the river to the south or the steep slope to the north. There are three things Pound is doing right now to improve and protect their town: murals, pocket parks, and applying for land stabilization grants. This location is for a future pocket park themed on an area where a small landslide damaged a building that has now been removed. The town also has preliminary sketches for a river walk. Murals. A cost-effective way to improve building stock has been the application of murals throughout the town. The themes of murals and pocket parks are existing efforts that I saw that could be incorporated into a broader language. To get a further sense of the town, we start with the connection to the land. This is what the mountains and ridges of Central Appalachia look like without state borders, in case you've never seen that before. It's really cool. With state borders, Pound is almost exactly a 7-hour drive from College Park. Oh no. Well, I want you to see the last image. Okay. No state borders. State borders. Okay. What's a 7-hour drive, almost exactly, from College Park. The immediate area sites it in the shadow of a 3,000-foot elevation ridge bordering Kentucky, where all the water comes down into the Pound River. Zooming in on downtown, this is what it looks like in figure ground. Most edges of the town are a short walk from the center, although there's opportunities for pedestrian infrastructure improvement. Topographically, all of the water flows down toward the built environment. Yes. 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 Vanna White. And when the water comes back up, this is what the floodplain risk looks like, which is most of the existing building stock. The town has a history of flooding that is growing increasingly frequent. The most recent notable flood was in 2022. Interestingly enough, the same July storm that hit College Park also flooded Pound at the same time. Further. One challenge to manage during this project was scope creep. The thesis time limit meant I needed to limit how much of the town I could work with, and the final scope of the project is mostly contained to the center of town, Main Street, between the river and the cliff. This is the figure ground in 2008, data gathered from Google Maps. Note the change to current day. This change suggested an area of greatest need, so I focused work in this area. These are the identified missing teeth, gaps in the street front of various types, other types as well to work with. And here's how they interact with the floodplain. Note that the north side of the street is almost entirely outside of the floodplain while the south side is almost entirely within it. Okay. So from that, the urban design strategy creates a tectonic language of a grid system that extends over the urban fabric's missing teeth, strengthening and protecting existing structures while creating new structure for new spaces to emerge. Since the north side of the street is fully out of the floodplain, it can be outfitted with habitable space, while the south side within the floodplain is infilled with non-habitable spaces represented by hatch. Here we start to break down the proposed new urban fabric by type of missing teeth. We have fit-outs or adaptive reuse strategies in gray that fill vacant buildings, new habitable buildings that fill gaps in the street wall, mostly to the north, and white, and non-habitable spaces that fill gaps in the street wall, mostly to the south. The grid system in the party is designed to vary in porosity and strength depending on where it is within the site. The heaviest, strongest materials are meant to live within the floodplain, but remain structurally open to allow water to flow through it without causing major harm. Concrete bases mark the FEMA flood elevation, then Corten steel columns emerge from them, which weather naturally and are completely recyclable at the end of their life should they need to be replaced. All second stories are primarily of wood or wood frame, depending on the proximity to the floodplain, and any wood close to water is of a rot-resistant species. The grid system is organized into a few distinct sizes for maximum flexibility. The park and riverwalk system can then be assembled to the residents' taste from various elements or even changed in the future. At either side of the grid, river or mountain, the grid starts to conform to the natural context. The boardwalk snakes to follow the river, and to the north side of the street, the grid begins to disintegrate into a system of piles and retaining walls that act as slope stabilization and protect buildings from being damaged by sliding slopes. Part of the site-specific approach, alongside working with the natural forces, is tailoring the urban program, which for this project includes social spaces and housing to help counter depopulation, and spaces intended to be economic drivers. Appalachia's rich natural context means many towns are turning to ecotourism to boost local economies. For the town of Pound, this means creating spaces that have a unique experience that encourage people to come visit, and spaces for small businesses to create an attractive shopping street like it was back in the day for the neighboring coal towns. From this starts to create places and a cohesive vision. If visiting, one might stay at the small hotel on the main street to attend a music festival at the outdoor amphitheater. They could visit the hiking hub and grab some supplies before taking a walk along the river or renting a kayak near the East Gateway. If they're into history, they can visit the Storytelling Park, Historical Society with its new pavilion, or book a guided mural walk or ghost tour at the Tourist Center in the Old Town Hall. Perhaps someone is a local resident and wants to take their dog to the dog park, grab lunch in the town square, window shop, or pick up an item at the library. Walking back down the street, one will encounter a few pocket parks before possibly turning around at the new kayak launch at the West Gateway. This is what that can start to look like in urban plan. This is the ground floor level, and this shows the roofs and the grid system above and the second floor. And this is what it can start to look like when we put all that together with our non-habitable spaces to the south and our habitable spaces to the north. Here's a way to see into some of the spaces of the Riverwalk system, the Historical Society Pavilion, or a vendor plaza that can be hosted alongside it. This is a view toward the music venue that could be used for regional concerts or even just busking. Some inspiration was taken from my visit to Charleston's Riverwalk and perhaps the Pritzker Pavilion in Chicago. Okay. Building design. The town of Pound sees plenty of people drive through, but not many people stay. The 3 focus buildings can be organized into short, medium, and long-term retention strategies, answering the questions, why would someone stop here? Why would someone return here? And why would someone stay here? The hiking hub. This building is intended as something to catch the eye and pique the interest of people arriving from the north entrance to town. The program is for a nature center on the bottom and a mini flagship hiking gear store, think a miniature REI, up top, intending to fill a regional program gap and attract tourists. It also acts as a gateway to draw people down into the Riverwalk system behind it. If one enters through the front, they may choose to cross the first floor to enter the amphitheater, or they would be drawn up to the retail floors by the triple height stair to the left and the warm glow of the timber ceiling. The missing teeth typology that this tangles with is a short building with new floors added on top, a type of adaptive reuse termed vertical addition. The grid that extends over the town acts as a totally separate structure to bear the load of the upper floors so that they don't need to depend solely on the original building's structural integrity. This is just my favorite image of the inside. The library. Oh my goodness. Because it gives a sense of experience from, I really wanted to, I had this image in my head for it being this like warm timber box that is sort of representative of the ecological, like the trees and the ecological benefits of the area, which I'll go into in a little bit. The library. The library is sited in a roofless structure known by residents as the Old Feeder, turning an old community hub into a new one. It acts as the medium-term retention strategy in that it benefits both residents of the town and of surrounding towns, and it is a third space for all ages. The Forum acts as a landmark building for the street, bringing the familiar residential typology of the gable into a civic use, which is part of the language of the overall urban design, but the building is not as prominent from all entrances as the hiking hub is. The program is for a large rentable indoor event space on the bottom floor for regional fairs and markets, or perhaps the town's local Red Fox Storytelling Festival. A small library on the second floor, including a lending library for tools and household appliances that supports the Appalachian culture of self-sufficiency, and a co-working space and cafe on the third floor that intends to act as workspace for remote employees and maybe convince them to stay longer term. The existing walls of the structure are preserved with as few amendments as possible, and they provide opportunity to continue the language of murals. The grid structure once again acts as a stabilizing feature and supports the weight of the new floors, as well as being a facade element. The existing door on the side can be opened on nice days to create passive ventilation in conjunction with operable skylights, and the south-facing front elevation provides hours of natural light and the ability to partially light the event space below. The module. The third focus building is a mass timber housing module intended to provide housing for longer-term residents. Its target audience is young adults ages 18 to 24-ish in order to try and retain some of that demographic. It could also house short or medium-term residents who move to town as tourists. It comes in two sizes, a studio and a 2-bed. It is designed to be prefabricatable and installed on top of the small business blocks in the town square on an as-needed basis, spreading out the costs over longer term. The panels are of a dowel laminated mass timber constructed of 2x4 and 2x12 only, and then outfitted with siding and interior finishes to preference. The finished wall assembly can meet passive house standards for R value depending on the insulation type, and the choice of mass timber is also deliberate. Since it's an emerging building technology in the US with emerging demand, it might pair well with the fact that the region has large timber resources managed using sustainable forestry and many local sawmills. Mass timber production has a very long-term possibility to start to become a region-wide industry, helping to lessen the effects of the gap the coal industry is leaving, the largest missing tooth of all. This module creates a small and flexible product demand to encourage local sawmills to invest in the technology, where they could then produce products for other projects in other cities. Here are a few of my favorite places of the project. The tennis court is a non-habitable structure next to the existing rescue squad building that could also be used for pickleball, encouraging people of all ages to get outside for low-impact community sports. The lot is currently rented to the adjacent auto shop, so it's likely a longer-term negotiation. This is a new pocket park, primarily a children's playground under the protective eye of a local historical figure. The quilt patches from the mural were all done by community members and are the inspiration for the quilt pattern motifs scattered throughout the project. This is my proposal for the pocket park that is viewed from the east entrance of town, a space celebrating a tradition of oral history where visitors can listen to area residents and tell the stories of the town and keep its history alive. This is a primary view of the town square as entered from the west. The hiking hub can be viewed from here as the central point of town. The grid structure to the south holds the southern street edge despite being a non-habitable space. The porch structures act as access points to the residential modules above and also provide a semi-private community gathering space for those residents. They also call back to porch culture of being able to sit on your porch and get eyes on the street, which is a large factor in increasing community reinvestment. Another challenge related to the project was getting to blur the lines between real work and schoolwork, having to navigate the demands of an MARC thesis, but also respect the desires of the town was a new skill. As a result, the design itself is not only flexible, but I've developed a loose phasing plan based on real world constraints as to what is most actionable for the town in the short term and long term, should they choose to implement anything. And one more thing, I actually got to visit Pound over spring break and I had a wonderful time meeting people and gathering site data. I hope they like some of the ideas and I hope I'll get the chance to come back again. And that concludes the missing teeth, the holes in our communities. Thank you all for listening, and thank you to a few more people. My friends and family who have cheered me on throughout the process, my partner Harrison, and to my committee, Professor Adam Ainsley, your insights are always appreciated. Professor Eric Jenkins, thank you for pushing me to think bigger. And Professor Joseph Williams, you were the right person for this from the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you talk about your boards? Can you walk around and point out some things you want to talk about? That I'd like to actually not have thesis presentations that involve a video, because you have these boards, and until at the end, I have to ask you to talk about them. So can you just talk about, you got some before and after figure grounds, you've got some diagrams. Talk to us about these
Yes.
drawings.
I hope we've seen most of the things in the presentations, but we have the urban party, which shows the design idea for what is the existing figure ground. And then we break it into the different typologies of missing teeth and what are being done with them to create a new figure ground that shows a continuous north street edge and a south street edge infilled by a non-habitable space and mostly programmed softscape. And the program diagram showing how things are distributed. These are ideas for what could be done within the grid park or riverwalk system, as it's being called. There are many more elements that could be designed or added, or I don't even know that I used all of them. But
Could you talk about your sections?
Oh,
What are
yes.
those trying to show?
Yes. So one of the main focuses of this urban transformation, if you will, was creating a cohesive street edge, because my research implies that that makes people feel safe, and it is an attractive thing to like walk down a nice shopping street or otherwise street. So I have a series of street sections that kind of show you different points along the street and how, and the sense of enclosure that the different program pieces can give you. So all the way to this end, you have a natural like cliff formation that creates, and we add a walkway along it that creates already a sense of enclosure, which is kind of cool. And then we start to get into the Riverwalk system with where the tennis court is next to the rescue squad building. We have the children's playground park. Another section. One of the things that I mentioned, of course, was not removing existing buildings, especially since these are in the floodplain, they would not be able to be put back. So the decision to create a walkway that pushes up to the street edge was important in trying to get that sense of enclosure into the street without having to either remove and replace these buildings or like infill on land in between them that is not that feasible to do.
Okay, I think that's good. So I want to open it up. Who would like to?
Like, yes, perhaps. The topography is a thing. This is up on the hill above there's a Methodist church up here, I believe. So I stood up here and took a nice photograph of the town street. Let's see, do I have anything else? I do personally like the east entrance view. When I drove in there myself, it was like the craziest sense of deja vu I've ever had, because I knew exactly where everything was. But I find it picturesque. Let me find the east view. back up one. Here. That is the main street right here. So the building with the red roof is this building. So it's getting towards like the end of the main street. The most picturesque views I find are from this or from the top of the hill or from the north entrance, which is why it was leveraged to put this building here. Thank you.
Could you do me a favor and, if you were to define the word nostalgia, how would you define that to me?
Nostalgic?
Nostalgia. And how that may have conceptualized some of what you did here.
Hmm.
Not a trick question.
No, that's fine. I'm just thinking. Like a memory that you can't quite place that makes you, I guess, feel happy.
That'll work.
And as for how it like played a part in the project, this project has to be both past looking and forward looking at the same time. And that's like sometimes difficult to reconcile in a design, but I hope with like the flexibility allowed and by like talking to what the town about what they wanted and things like that, we reach like the Goldilocks level of not too little and not too much. And that means that it can exist with the history and still provide new uses for future generations.
Appreciate that. Because I'm really struck by this diagram up here that illustrates flood levels. And I was wondering, do you have any other
Flood
diagrams? The one up here that talks about the flood levels? And then I was thinking about if you've done any study about, I think is it 2050 and 2080, the years when we should be mapping our flood levels, because that's actually where the water levels are going to be.
Wow.
And so imagining where this is and where the town is located, what the projected flood elevations are for 2050 and 2080, and what the realities of this city will be. Because I think there in this little town, it's a beautiful town. There's, you know, I've been in hundreds of these. I love them all, but a statement that I would make is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And sometimes hard conversations need to be made or had. I think what you're going to find in a 2050 modeling is that you're not going to have a main street any longer. And then so the wonder and beauty of this little community is not going to be any longer. And so as you begin to imagine that, how would you then alter your thinking relative to the thesis? I'm going to go two directions on this. The first one is that one, that basically I would have reimagined the town in a different way. I recently was working on a project, Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, Little Creek, Main Street, right on a river, just like this. Had a hellacious flood, wiped out everything at the bottom of the site. So we have been asked to look at what we would do for a resort development on the hillside as a destination. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And I would say that when you came in and you were starting to develop some of those narratives, I was all there. I'm still there, buying in on the notion that this can be a destination place. So as an architect, as an urban planner, as those begin to blend, they blend inside of me. That's so. How could you really support the future of Pound and allow it to be sustainable and have a sustainable future? And so I think that that's part of the construct of the thesis. And then so I would say if that was the construct of the thesis, we may have a different foundation that we're starting from as far as the conversation. I'm going to flip now, and I'm going to come and meet you right where you are. And that's with your installation. One of the things I was thinking of is I would be really, really convinced if you had more precedent images that illustrated sort of how this helped and sort of what you were imagining to bring you here. Because I immediately thought, and this is going to say my age, Parc de la Villette, what was that, 92? I don't even remember. It's not all connected, but it's built upon this spine of a grid, if I'm not mistaken, an idea of a grid, circulation, connectiveness, and then follies along that grid. And that's kind of what you're making in some ways, is sort of you're reconstructing this urban condition with folly moments. And then you're trying to make them all so that a flood can't take them out. And so you're constantly designing for that flood. And then I would go back to some of the other conversations that we were having earlier. What has informed the architectural decisions that you've made? And it seems like they're hearkening back on this nostalgia and not sort of placing themselves in a current moment of architecture and how this is adaptive. This town was never imagined as this overlay of a grid system framework. And now you've got this appendage or prosthetic that is now going to support over the incumbent flood. And then so how do you then adapt? And then what informs that adaptation? I would say that these building forms, these building glazing, these sections, they're not necessarily connected to the logic that you've created with the grid. And so I was trying to figure out exactly what led you to some of those decisions, and that's what led me to ask the question relative to nostalgia.
Yeah, sure. I think I can answer that. A lot of it does harken back to the diagram that you were talking about. The materials themselves came from the sort of the land in a way. We talked about mass timber as being an emerging industry that could benefit the region. And there are a lot of timber resources, so that seemed a logical choice for at least one material. Steel, to me, is related to railroads and the railroad industry of that. And then, of course, the existing town fabric has a lot of brick, and we're using existing buildings, so that became a third material, and then concrete for its durability and strength, particularly on the south side. As to where they're placed, we have this diagram here. The sort of the lower and closer to the ground something is, the more solid of a volume that it is, and then the higher levels become lighter in weight, but also more open often. So the wood material is always placed on a second level. So for instance, this is a good example building of that, but also so is actually all of them are, the hiking hub as well. Once things reach a second story, they become primarily mass timber and wood-based.
These are silly kinds of questions, but all the steel's going to be sourced from China, and then none of the lumber in this area is the right species for heavy timber. And then so, question is like, I really, really appreciate this notion of rootedness, and then, but then sort of permeating that through with that level of research that's going to give us that sort of practical installation.
I actually can answer that.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, I want to praise you. Really beautiful presentation, really great verbal presentation. We know these are a huge amount of work, and just for everyone, this is the time to critique and discuss. So, I know at UVA we had some students who got very upset, and we were trying to explain this is what we're here for, is to have this conversation. And the more you generate, the better the project. So it isn't about, oh, this is beautiful, there's nothing to say. It's just perfect. Okay, it wouldn't change anything. You know what I mean? So we're here to. So basically anything that goes up, we're going to be critiquing and discussing. That's number one. In terms of my reaction, I guess what I'm seeing is kind of the idea of a filter. It feels like you're saying, okay, this is a flooding. I really, to be honest, I thought when you said missing teeth, we were going to see a more urban kind of fabric with pieces missing, which you see in cities all the time. What I'm seeing is more of, you're doing a whole set of dentures here, right? This is like, this didn't have enough to be, in my opinion. It's not the right name. So I'm not understanding the name in terms of what you're talking about, because you're literally filling in entire swaths, right? And then you have the upper teeth and the bottom teeth. Our upper teeth are what we see all the time, and that's kind of the pretty, right? And that's the part you're making very beautiful. and Main Street-ish. And then the bottom, you're really leaving it the way it was. And you're just putting this grid of open frame for outdoor spaces, right? Or public spaces. So it's very asymmetrical. And that's really not how main streets typically are. They're usually more kind of, it might go back and forth a little bit. You might have some open space, but it's not like this is all a grid of open space and this is all built up. So for me, it's feeling very one-sided and kind of heavy on the top. And on the bottom, I was hoping you were going to fill it in with architecture that serves as the filter, architecture that actually deals with the flooding. So we did a house in Miami, right, where that's flooding. We have a beach house in Delaware that floods. There are techniques, right? There's a lot of interesting ways to do it, both landscape-wise and architecturally, but it has to be the two together. So kind of going back to the last project, the idea of weaving together outdoor and indoor and what architecture can be as it works with landscape. And as Todd was saying, for the last project, I was sort of hoping to see a really unique and creative, and maybe not realistic yet, but futuristic idea of how to deal with this flooding through buildings. So that side could be a really, really dynamic kind of architecture that I might not even know today, because typically what we do now is we lift everything up. We had to put our Miami house on, 9 foot up, and anything down below has flood funds. It's very uncreative. And same with our house. It's the same thing. Lift it up, let the water come in. Or if you're going to lift it up and let the water come in, or do what you did, maybe there's boats going down the street during floods, and you have a whole other world of life that goes on when the town floods, and you accept it, and you have floating restaurants and floating, you know what I mean? So I would love to have seen this pushed more into, as Todd's saying, 2050, 2080, where we're really looking at with major flooding where that entire Main Street will be water. Do you engage that? Does the architecture change? So when you're doing the housing, which I actually think the housing is quite beautiful. I love your idea, and I love that. To me is the most successful architectural piece. I'm not as convinced by the hiking hub. It's a little too, referential to the past, and residential is not resident. There's a lot of things I could talk about architecturally, but the housing I really think is beautiful. The idea of that modular piece made of the wood that goes on top, all of that, and could change size, but it has some character to it. The problem I have with this modular kit of parts is it's extremely uninteresting and it's just a grid of, columns and beams. And you talked at the beginning about specificity, which I agree with, a level of specificity and a level of flexibility, but that's very not specific at all. It could be anywhere. So when I look at that side of the street, I'm like, well, that could be in any town anywhere, and it doesn't feel specific to this. And I actually don't think that would bring enough tourism in anyway, what you're doing. I don't think you've thought through bringing people to this town. Like if you said this is now a new art hub and there's going to be artists coming in and artists, blah, blah, something that would convince me that you really are bringing people here. And tennis courts and, a little pavilion, they're just not going to do it. A hiking hub, storytelling, it's just not going to do it. So I'm pushing you to be a little more, make yourself really study these things and see what does bring industry to a little town like this, and we've all been in these little towns and they're dying, of course, from the coal industry. So what could you do? And I'm not convinced yet by your program. But again, my main thing is to think about both sides of the street. How are they both dynamic and interesting? And I don't think the side with the grid right now is interesting enough and going to pull people. And also, how can architecture do more than just what architecture does today? Because we do have changing climate, obviously major change in climate. You have flooding, you have, weather, all kinds of things that architecture is going to have to respond to. So that I feel like was a missed opportunity. But overall, beautiful drawings. The sections are gorgeous.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't want to be a downer here, but this is the type of town that has put us in the political situation that we're in. It's a town where they feel like they've been left behind. Probably they're not going to be able to get insurance for these properties because of the flooding. And so, okay, you're going to come up with a way to make some of this site habitable again. So at least architecturally and I want to say urbanistically, although this is, in the country. You have set up this sort of grid work. I don't see why you just can't build on top of it, not unlike what you were saying.
Yeah.
And that could be a way to remedy the situation of the flooding and not, and being able to show that, yes, maybe you can get insurance for a place like this. Once you start this grid, it reminds me of the book Invisible Cities, where there are, I guess, is a description of Venice and the different architectural things that were done to make Venice work. And so I think that's your challenge in this project. These are the type of towns that in November expressed themselves, and that's why we are where we are since the elections in November. So, all right, let's now really reach out, which is, I applaud you for this. Let's go in and give them the attention that they need to make their lives and lifestyle, work, really work. And, so it's not the polarization that we have. So again, I can imagine where these people landed on the political spectrum. And so what you're trying to do, I think is really good, is how can the architecture, at least as a designer, make this town work? And not just hold the grid, that's great, to hold the street edge, but it's like, it's not enough. So that's what I think that the next step, I would say, once you sort of build above this grid, and that grid could be consistent all the way, to fill in, it could be parking underneath, it could be some of the things you have, but then above it can be housing or offices or other things that you have to challenge architecturally to make it work. So that's my take on it.
Hi, nice to see you.
You too.
I love the drawings. I think they're gorgeous. I like the looseness in the hand drawing. I like the idea of modular. I think it's the future of a lot of what we're seeing in buildings, especially small buildings. So I think that those are the right instincts. Where I diverge a little bit is I'm not convinced about the grid. Maybe you studied it and decided that this was the way to go, and you chose the materials that you chose, and you went with it. One of the questions I wrote down is, if a grid is the right answer, why is it the same materials throughout? I'm looking at the trees that you've drawn in. Could the trees have continued the grid? When I think about storm water management, I'm always thinking about how much trees suck up, flood event, rainfall, all of that. Could the trees have helped mitigate some of the those 50, 100-year, 500-year floods that we're talking about, or like heavy rainfall events? Could those trees have been incorporated as the grid system in certain moments? The decision, I'm looking at your hiking hub and I'm thinking like, gosh, why would you want to compete with that incredible backdrop? I know you don't want to remove any buildings, but that to me is your money shot. That's your view. Like when I come in, I see, I'm coming around the corner from that church below. I'm looking at that hiking hub and thinking, boy, that's in the way of the view that I really want. If you had an opportunity to sort of modulate this and then interrupt that modulation, that would be the moment to me that you would, you've constrained your main street. That could be that moment of interruption where you stumble along, across something that's really incredible, that really invites you to come down to the river and to experience it. And then my final thought, because I know we're running out of time and I want Professor Bell to be able to speak too, but the idea, I didn't see any precedents really. And I was just in Rotterdam and the Amsterdam and The Hague last year, and I was thinking about all of the wonderful floodable spaces that country has, that the Netherlands have figured out how to live below sea level, right? The ground doesn't just stay sort of this flat plane, but there's all these sorts of Venice-like canals, like, is there a way, if you have this grid system to sort of, I looked at all of the views here and everything kind of has this flat plane, is there sort of a subsurface? Is there a way to experience this when it is flooded that allows you to kind of walk around the flooded areas. You know, are there places in this that are meant to remind us of flooding? Could the art on the outside of this building that's very fortress-like remind us of where that floodplain, where those floodplain levels are? You know, like all of the surfaces in this chosen site are opportunities for us to say, we're in this moment, really pivotal time. You know, this town might not be here in 50 or 100 years. Like, let's take the opportunity to remind us of where we are, what the dangers are. You know, let's use every surface to absorb water, to think about how we can possibly preserve the life of this town, you know, extend the life, save any additional buildings by, you know, building in sinks or cisterns or areas that are supposed to be flooded, and then really use that as not just hidden, like, oh, this is underground and nobody knows it's here, but like a way to really remind people of like, this is a floodable area. This is something that happens here because of the proximity to the river and the topography.
Yeah.
But
I like that.
I'll-
Thank you.
I'll pass the mic.
Hi, Hannah. I think the small towns, even this is more of a village, are very difficult because they're very fragile. You know, there's not a huge amount of stuff there to work with. It's not very forgiving in certain ways, and they oftentimes are very quirky. And I was sitting here listening to you talk about this, and I thought of a couple of different places that are interesting to compare this to. One obviously is Ellicott City. And the problem of Ellicott City is that the more interesting architecture is down at the bottom, and that's the place that floods the worst, and they have all kinds of problems. And you're lucky because you have half of Main Street and this older part here that doesn't flood, right? And, you know, Corbu famously said there's no such thing as primitive people, just primitive means. And I think when they laid this town out, they probably understood that that intersection there was elevated, right? And it wasn't going to flood or have the potential of flooding like some of these other places. And if you go to old cities, you know, I remember years ago we did a problem over in one of those Centerville, Maryland, where there's a courthouse, and we realized that they put the courthouse right at the top of a small hillock so the thing would drain well on all four sides. So I think when people laid these towns out, they had intuitively that sort of understanding. That's one thing. In compared to Ellicott City, I think you're good to sort of have some of that in infill there. The second place I thought of a little bit is Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, and I don't know if you've ever
I've
been
been there.
there. Have you
Yes.
been there? It is really interesting because the Main Street kind of winds and crinkles and crankles, and there's like a termination at each of those. And
Yeah.
I get the feeling in your project was kind of designed in axonometric, but not in a kind of experiential way as you entered a town there, because I think that these grid frames are a little bit overbearing. And I think maybe somebody mentioned earlier the La Villette project, not that this is the same as Paris, but maybe a similar strategy where interventions that had a relationship to the perspective experience of coming in and out of the town may have made something maybe more appropriate to the scale here rather than a grid that sort of is all encompassing. The third town I thought of was Marfa, Texas, where they invented that art festival, and they have public art and things in the streets. This may be too small for that, I don't know. But it's something that they invent and they've gotten known for, and they've grown and people come there and things like that. The last thing I'll say about the grid is I'm often reminded of the Project for Public Spaces rule of thumb is that you need 10 different activities to activate a place, different things that go on there. And it makes me wonder, and I think there probably always will be some part of this downtown as a place that people always need places to go out to eat and socialize and things like that. I think the challenge today is that the triple whammy here of Amazon, of flooding, and of the coal industry is really done damage on this place. It's very hard to recover from that. So these towns kind of contract. You know, they can't be as big as they were. And I think if I had to pick where to focus, I think I'd be down at this end, which I think is the older part there, because stringing out along there, as your scheme suggests, I think is maybe in a way, the word was mentioned, nostalgic. It's trying to solve that end and make it more sort of an interesting place like this is, even though it's got a lot of other problems. It's kind of suburban. It's got some flooding, a lot of flooding issues and things. I think if I was trying to do that, I would try to focus more at the end that is really worth saving. And then what I would do is probably try and introduce as many different uses as I could into this area to get as many people coming down there on a regular basis. And that's one of my problems with the frame, is that it tends to be specific and not flexible to be able to accommodate things like large events or sports and things. I'd probably put basketball, more tennis, more soccer, maybe even a soccer field that could bridge across the canal, the creek. It could flood, the green fields could flood, but things that have different activities for different people so that they're coming down there for lots of different reasons. I think the hiking center might be one reason. Maybe that's an outdoor outfitter's place. I guess that's what it is. The library is another thing. Adding 5 or 10 more things there would help that. And I would probably try to concentrate them so they're within easy reach of what I think is the best piece of the downtown that looks like it's this piece where those two roads come together.
It's actually quite small overall. The 10-minute walking radius from the middle is here, I believe.
I just wanted to make 2 really fast comments. One is to commend your graphics and the deconstruction of the panels with the cutaways and the movement of the missing pieces or the addition of the prosthetic pieces. And tying into that, I think I would respond to the comments that we've heard by saying, let's move the other buildings. So let's move the buildings that are on this side of the street, on the stream side. That's cheaper, the embedded carbon. Let's just move them across the street. We'll have a full set of upper teeth. And then the lower teeth will become a La Villette, where it'll be your grid system will populate this park, which will have retention ponds and that section over there about, recovering waters and all that. And that'll be your landscape resilient part of the project. And so I think that I would go back to your missing teeth and I'd say, okay, we have a full set of teeth if we put them all together. And so, good job.
Okay, Hannah, congratulations. I mean, wow, this is a really, really thorough thesis. I want to talk a little bit about some of what lay beneath the research or some of the deeper parts of the research that Hannah did, which there never is enough time to capture all that in a brief presentation. But she interviewed at the mayor's office in Pound over and over again, these ongoing conversations with them, with the flood insurance people in the region. It became very, very clear to you that it was a non-starter to try and build habitable structures on that lower part of the street. So what do we do with that? Your theory is missing teeth. And I want to praise Hannah's stick-to-itiveness with that thesis and that premise, because it might actually go against some of our initial impressions of what makes a healthy urban center. I think we all see that town is a very beautiful place right now. And so when Hannah proposes a transformation to that urban street edge, we feel like something is being taken away from that beauty. But Pound is failing, and it's failing because of these toxic gaps in the street edge. And your research shows that. And so there needs to be a solution to that, and that's actually to repair the gaps in the street edge. So I would agree with the comments by the reviewers that there's a lot you can do to nuance the grid system. But I think at the end of the day, you have to do something, because as your figure grounds show, Pound is disappearing. The street edge is being flooded out, destroyed, and cannot be replaced because of the flood problem. So she also went to Pound and did a photogrammetric survey so that she could understand at a very granular level these the landscape sections here, so that she could really nail it. And so she feels that the design really comes together in those transverse sections along the street edge. And the goal, according to the theory, is to keep a continuous street edge. So I want us maybe to challenge some of our presuppositions of what makes a town beautiful and think about what makes a town work, because the missing teeth theory coming from criminology and urbanism has a lot to suggest it. Well done, Hannah. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.